joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin this morning with Doug Kelly. He is the CEO of American Edge Project. Doug, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Glenn, thanks so much for having me.
You bring a different perspective to the show than what we've heard from prior guests, specifically in Utah Senator Mike Lee and Representative Chris Stewart, who have been very critical of big tech and how they view what's playing out in that arena. Give us a little bit of background about American Edge Project and what you are all about.
Yeah, so the American Edge Project is a coalition of 24 different groups from around the country. And what we believe is that technology isn't just another sector of the economy. It is the backbone of our national security, of our economy, and also the advancement of our values, both at home and abroad. And so it's really, really critical that we protect our tech innovators in this country, because those companies are the ones that give us a competitive edge over our adversaries.
And it's my understanding you have a bipartisan group of lawmakers associated with your group as well. Dig into that for us, if you will.
Sure. So we have former elected officials, both from the Democratic side and the Republican side. We have other advisory board members who were part of the military, part of leading economic think tanks. So we've got a lot of firepower behind what our positions are. And at the end of the day, look, Democrats and Republicans are both frustrated with certain angles of big tech, but the things that they're talking about doing in Washington don't actually solve those problems. And when you look at what China is doing on their technology, China is very clear in their stated goals. They want to be the world's #1 superpower by 2035, and they see that technology is the way to do it. So they're investing trillions of dollars in their own capabilities of semiconductors, 5G, and other advanced technologies, but they're also stealing about $500 billion a year in our technology. And so the American Edge looks at these bills that are in Washington right now and say, wait a minute, there's reasonable reforms that can be done, but breaking apart our biggest tech companies who give us the best advantage against China, breaking them up, restricting their lines of business, or even restricting the acquisitions that they can make of emerging technologies, that's just a wrong-headed approach to take.
So Doug, let's dig into that a little bit more. What do you see as a reasonable, viable move moving forward?
Sure. So I'll just give you one example of how sometimes Washington officials can miss the ball, right? So I'm from Michigan, a very heavy manufacturing community. And manufacturing in America was the envy of the world for a long time. But then policies passed in Washington shipped a lot of those jobs overseas. It devastated our manufacturing base. And the American Edge Project does not want the same thing to happen to American technology. So one way to do this and kind of square this all up is to say, how do we increase our country's domestic innovative capabilities by investing more in our technology here? So passing a bill that helps us increase the number of semiconductors that we build in this country. And at the same time, how do we check China's ambitions, both from getting their hands on really critical core technologies, as well as what are we doing to address the $500 billion a year in theft of US technology? Those are three. They should have bipartisan agreement, but they're not getting a lot of oxygen right now in Washington, and they deserve it.
Okay, you mentioned big tech and being in the hot seat in Washington, D.C. Our Utah Senator Mike Lee, front and center in this conversation. So I want to get into some of the claims that he makes and some of his perspective. We've also heard that, again, as I've already mentioned, from Representative Chris Stewart here in Utah, and that is that these big tech companies are controlling the narrative, silencing conservatives, and infringing on free speech. Is there a problem when it comes to that in our country with big tech?
Well, look, content moderation issues are always challenging, right? And a lot of the big platforms are asking Congress for help and saying, hey, what type of speech, help us figure these guidelines out? Because I don't think companies like Facebook and Twitter and others are comfortable in making some of those calls. They do, because they say, hey, look, we want to make sure under Section 230 that we're taking down content that is harmful. And so sometimes the challenges come in where lines are what content is questionable or other things like that. So many companies have asked for help and, hey, how do we get this to a better spot overall. But content moderation is a challenging thing. But does
In the
that mean you
meantime,
break
though,
up a company for that? That
Doug, I'd
doesn't
like
make
to get your
sense.
thoughts on this, though. Is there an issue with big tech silencing conservatives and targeting them more than Democrats?
No, not a bit. I think the internet, I think if you look at the data, right? So the internet has helped create and empower more voices than any time in our history, right? So the birth of the internet was basically in 1994. That's kind of when it was first commercialized and really moving out there, right? If you look at the election pattern since then, conservatives controlled the House and the Senate a vast majority of the time since 1994 when the internet came around, because conservatives have used it to organize, to find like-minded voices, to use it to make more voices heard, and to stop legislation. So I would argue that since the birth of the internet, conservatives have had an amazing run on the internet to use it to win elections and to pass their agenda. So far from stifling voices, a free, open, and accessible internet actually allows more voices to be heard.
Should big tech at this moment be banning people from their sites, as we have seen?
Well, it depends on what people are doing, right? I mean, if people are doing dangerous things, then again, those are tough calls overall. But let's talk a little bit about what it would mean to Utah as well, right? Because sometimes the extremes of content moderation, that gets a lot of the attention. But what's some of the substance in the bills? These are things that go right back and hurt states like Utah. For example, one of the bills would say, okay, if you're a big platform and you meet certain criteria, you cannot do any acquisitions whatsoever. Now, those same rules don't apply to their Chinese counterparts. But let's take a look at Utah, right? In the 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, there was 870 startup businesses that were based in Utah that raised $7 billion in venture capital. So one of the appeals of the people investing in this capital and helping those businesses grow is the fact that they might be bought and acquired by a Microsoft or a Facebook or an Amazon. So if you take those off the table, all of a sudden it's going to be harder for those businesses to raise money. Investors are going to go and get a lower rate of return, and that capital is going to go somewhere else. In the meantime, if one of those startups in Utah made a game-changing technology, our biggest companies couldn't buy it, but China could buy it. How in the world does that make sense to handcuff our biggest tech companies' hands and leave China free to acquire the most innovative technologies in the world? That doesn't make sense. So reasonable reforms can be done with technology, but breaking apart our biggest innovators in this big battle against China, that just doesn't make sense.
All right, Doug, you've talked a lot about economic impact as you see it. You've also alluded to national security, but be a little more specific. What's at risk when it comes to national security? I have about a minute left.
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to national security, China has recognized that its weakness is innovation. And so it's investing trillions of dollars in its capabilities to boost it up. They're also stealing our technology as well. And so when you think about things like hypersonic missiles, cyber defenses, artificial intelligence, our biggest companies are investing billions of dollars in those areas. And they're providing both commercial and military uses for those technologies as a check against China. If you split these companies apart or restrict what type of lines of business they can go into, that again just hands an edge to China. And that's not what we need to do. It's a direct threat to our national security.
All right,
So
Doug, we have run out of time, but a very fascinating conversation. Where can our viewers connect with your organization to learn more?
Sure. People can learn more about our organization at the AmericanEdgeProject.org. And if people want to make a difference, have them call their senators or their U.S. rep and say, hey, I'm concerned that we're going too far on this, and I'm worried about hurting Utah's technology ecosystem.
All right. Thanks for your time.
We
will watch and see how this plays out. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much.
Still to come.